Greetings to you, dear gamers! ArenaNet has dropped a bombshell earlier today, introducing the global release of Guild Wars Reforged on mobile, some cool new changes to how the AI behaves, and a massive balance update which will shatter the current PvE hero team meta with a hammer. For the next few minutes, I would like to provide you with a few highlights for what skills you might want to look out for without discussing the entire patch in great length. Now let's buckle up and get right into it. As you can see, I have already marked a few notes. Let's start with the mobile release. So today, Guild Wars Reforged has finally been launched globally on iOS and Android. And what I found particularly striking is that there's now also support to play it on your phone or basically your mobile device with a gaming controller. That is pretty cool. It runs now by default on 60 FPS, but apparently some devices could run too hot, so you can set it to 30 FPS too. The lock-in with Steam is apparently not possible still, but at least ArenaNet is working on that. I think this entire episode here of the game is pretty cool, adding it to mobile. I mean, Guild Wars is known to be optimized to basically run on a potato, so your phone doesn't need to be a top model like you can see here. This is kind of the minimum specs you gotta have. Android 7 and above, for example, with more than 3 GB of RAM. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Reforged has already started to draw in so many new and old players back into the game. Extending it to mobile will only help with that, support the game more, spread the word, and allow more people, like those who, for example, do not have a computer, to play the game. Alright, let me move right over bug fixes to hero AI, because I think there's a few notes here that are worthy pointing out. ArenaNet has adjusted how melee heroes select their targets and that they stick rather to previous targets and don't move as much anymore between targets. Obviously, the foe that you target yourself will have priority, but still, especially melee heroes sometimes wasted a bit too much time when moving around, and now this seems to be more optimized. The same applies here basically to heroes freezing less when they have difficulty to get to their preferred target. Again, primarily important for melee heroes in that sense. Also, their AoE damage tolerance is increased. The health threshold when they start running out of an AoE spell, for example, or an AoE skill in general, is now increased. So they have more tolerance and will stay in some kind of AoE pools for a bit longer before they run out and scatter. Lastly here, the priority for melee heroes to use their auto attacks has been reduced until their energy levels are low. Basically meaning melee heroes will use their skills more likely, more prioritized before they start auto-attacking. Lastly, the priority for melee heroes to use auto-attacks has been reduced until their energy levels are low. Basically what this means is heroes will prioritize skills more over auto-attacks and swap to prioritizing auto-attacks only when energy is low. Seems pretty straightforward. Now, next up is the AI of pets, like Ranger class pets. And I'm pretty hyped about this. I'm not sure how you feel about pets, Ranger pets in game, but I am always quite disappointed and dissatisfied with them, especially with how much they stand around, do not target the target they're supposed to, and simply waste valuable time in combat doing nothing productive. And well, ArenaNet has tackled these issues, at least some of them, and I'm really looking forward to how this will play out in the next few weeks. Now, there are also some AI skill adjustments in how heroes and enemies use particular skills. There are only a few I would like to point out. One is Unyielding Aura, the skill that you activate, one that you maintain, and when you end it, a random party member will be resurrected with full health. What ArenaNet did here is basically changing the priority, who to give priority in your party. For example, when multiple heroes run Unyielding Aura. An interesting side note here is that players may be able to get desired results by reordering heroes so that lower priority heroes are lower in the party list. But also, brace yourself, a shout, Paragon shout, to read here that this skill will now be prioritized towards allies that have self-knockdown. So basically what this skill does is applying a shout to one of your allies, and whenever this particular ally gets would be knocked down, they don't, and nearby foes get damage instead. So I like the combination here with self-knockdown, that you, for example, or certain heroes can run up to the enemies and apply self-knockdown skill, do not get knocked down, but apply damage to foes around them. So 2 more here, Anthem of Weariness and They Are on Fire. They will be used by your heroes, for example, or your henchmen, to maintain certain echoes that renew, for example, when a shout runs out. Okay, so let's get into the big chunk for today, the game-changing update. Okay, maybe not entirely game-changing, but at least the meta will change. The Mesmer way meta will certainly change a bit. I will also here focus a bit more on the highlights to keep this video at a palatable length. So first up, Way of the Empty Palm, a skill that enables you to cast offhand and dual attacks without spending energy. It's an elite skill, and while the effect duration is decreased or reduced, what I think is pretty important to note here is that aside from not using energy for offhand and dual attacks, the skills recharge 25 to 50% faster. And this is a pretty massive change in the way that assassin builds can, spam these kind of attacks. But I expect this to be reflected in some upcoming builds. Alright, many of the other skill changes, reduced recharge times or energy costs, so slight changes that make melee assassins a bit stronger. For Dervish, pretty important to point out here, Pious Assault and Mystic Regeneration. One of them is a buff, basically increasing damage for Pious Assault, which is pretty cool. But for Mystic Regeneration, the energy cost is increased. But I've always been a big fan of it, to get quick +8 health regeneration for yourself. Although usually in the builds that I run it with, I sometimes struggle a little with energy management, to be honest. And the fact that this costs 15 more, 5 energy more and 15 in total, is kind of a bit of a letdown for me. So I might drop it from the occasional build I'm running with. Aside from that, there have only been a few minor changes when it comes to activation time and increasing recharges, or like this is basically a nerf for Rending Aura, increasing recharge, almost doubling it. Sign of Pious Restraint is also nerfed. And for Whirling Charge, we still have to see. I mean, the cost is reduced now, but the effects are lowered. Okay. Elementalist overall gets pretty much buffed by decreasing recharge times, but in some cases increasing energy cost. But still, if you think about it, like Double Dragon decreasing the recharge time, increasing the damage, and setting the enemy on fire, but also Fireball now affecting nearby foes and not just adjacent. I think this is a big change. That was, in my opinion, always one of the weakest points of Fireball, which is why I never liked using it, is that adjacent is pretty close. Think about it. So, area of effect, right? So here you see, this is adjacent, and now we go to nearby. The AoE pool is just a lot larger now. Pretty good change. Kinetic armor I thought was interesting. To show you, this is a skill that provides you with more armor, and it renews automatically when you cast a skill. For longer fights, you can basically maintain it easily. And I think it's pretty interesting to see that the effect duration is increased and the recharge time is decreased. So between fights, when you try to maintain it, it now gets a lot easier. Lastly, for Elementalist, I would like to point out Thunderclap here. Same with Fireball. the range gets increased from nearby to adjacent. So going back to our image, doesn't look like much now, but if you look at the overall area that is now increased, the changes are pretty big. Coming to Mesmer, and perhaps the biggest, most upsetting part for this balance patch. Let's start up with Arcane Conundrum, which is sometimes run in, like you would see, for example, in aptitude builds that are complementary run in a Mesmer way team. Some of those builds would use Arcane Conundrum, and this skill has now received a nerf basically with an increased recharge time, and increased by 33%. I'm kind of sad to see this because I'm a big fan of running my team with an inaptitude Mesmer. It's not the most efficient way probably. If you go by pure numbers, most likely up until now, just running with as many domination Mesmers as you can is more effective, but I'm a big fan of inaptitude myself. And then the two biggest upsets for this balance patch. First off, Cry of Frustration, a skill that many of us love, gets an increased recharge time and the damage is reduced. So to bring you up to speed, if you're not aware, this is an interrupt skill, and if you interrupt, if you're successful, all foes in the area receive damage. So this is a pretty cool skill. It always had a bit of an energy investment, but it was always a cool skill, and now it just got slightly nerfed. And obviously, this is the biggest nerf that we see here, Energy Surge. The absolute classic standard elite skill that all Mesmer way team comps would run with. What the skill does, the target foe loses energy for every point lost. They and nearby foes take damage. It is a pretty strong skill, and it gets a lot stronger if you stack up your team with a couple of Mesmers who do exactly the same. But now, not only is the energy lost reduced, which means the total damage is reduced, but also the damage taken for nearby foes, the AoE damage, is reduced by 25%. And this is a drastic change. This reduces the damage output of Mesmer way teams by a lot. Another skill to point out here is Mistrust, a hex spell, basically causing the next target foe's spell to fail and dealing damage to this foe and nearby foes. Here also, damage has been reduced massively. There have been some more nerfs for Mesmer skills, but I think the ones that I showed you now are the most drastic ones. Okay, coming up to Monk. Monk in general has received quite the buff, especially Smite, in my opinion. Balthasar's Aura, for example, a skill that causes foes adjacent to a certain target ally taking holy damage each second around them. Energy cost reduced by 10 energy, which is massive. Reduced activation time, reduced recharge, and increased damage. So an overall buff, and this skill now is actually pretty viable in my opinion. Then some heal and some prot skills have received buffs, but I would like to point out, before I go to heal and prot, I would also like to point out Ray of Judgment and Symbol of Wrath. Ray of Judgment, we know the Jesus Beam, fantastic skill, at least if you can make your foes stay where they are, has now a decreased activation time, a reduced recharge, and increased damage. So fantastic. This is a pretty good skill in combination with, for example, Water Magic Elementalists, Earth Magic Elementalists, or anyone who can knock down foes, who can slow them so that they don't scatter out of the Ray of Judgment. And this is often also used going with Arcane Echo, so you can cast it twice. And I'm pretty interested to see if we are going to see more of that. Also, a really cool change for Smite monks is Symbol of Wrath. So basically, this is a skill that you would cast, and then enemies who are around your location would get damage. This has now been changed, so the AoE pulse happens at the target's location instead of the caster's. This makes the skill a lot more flexible, and I'm pretty happy about this because I was always complaining about it in pre-searing, for example, where I run with a monk. And lastly for monk here, Shield of Regeneration, a pretty good skill that provides tons of health generation and some good armor for your allies. Has now a reduced energy cost. 15 has always been quite a lot. At times I would still run with this, with my own monk, if I play a prot monk, for example, because I just like the skill. It's pretty strong, pretty effective, and has a low recharge, a low cooldown. And now the energy cost is reduced, and, well, armor increased by scaling. So overall, pretty good changes for monk. They cannot complain. Coming up, equally good, I would say, is for Necromancer. Specifically, Minion Masters now received a buff that I think was long overdue. While many of us like to have a Minion Master hero within our team, playing it yourself is not really fun. Personally, I think so because of the activation time. It's just 3 seconds is just way too long. I'm sorry. Now, many of the Minion Master skills, death magic skills, have been reduced. The activation has been reduced to 1 second. Absolutely phenomenal. Reduced energy cost. Overall, a really good buff. And I'm especially happy about Animate Bone Fiend, where you now save 10 energy. Many more skills got buffed. I would like to point out 2 more here. Spiteful Spirit. Pretty popular spell already, where you hex a foe, and whenever they attack or use a skill, they would receive damage, but not only them, also adjacent foes. And now the effect time, the effect duration has been increased, and the damage has been increased. I'm pretty happy about this. It's a cool skill, we should use it more. Absolutely. And also, Whale of Doom has an increased effect duration from 1 to 4 seconds to 2 to 6 seconds. So it doesn't sound like much, but Whale of Doom is a skill that sets the foe's attributes to 0. And now I'm actually interested in how viable it is to run with 2 Whale of Doom Necros for certain boss runs and just keep the boss's attributes at 0, because you could maintain it now. Pretty interested to see how this will turn out, or if it's not viable. We gotta see. Now, coming up, Paragon. Now, Paragon has some cool changes we could talk about. First off, aggressive refrain, an echo that makes you attack faster, and one that reapplies so you can maintain it. Pretty cool to see that the energy cost is reduced, because 25 is pretty hefty, especially if you're in between fights and you have a bit of a break. And also seeing a reduced activation time. Already a good skill. I'm pretty happy to see it buffed. And also Mighty Throw, a skill that you would get pretty early on when you start out with your Paragon. On paper, it sounds cool if you only read the effects. You know, the spear moves faster and it does more damage. But 3 seconds of activation time, I always consider that to be infeasible for any build. Although the adrenaline cost is pretty low, but 3 seconds of charging, that has always been a no-go for me. So now I'm happy to see this being reduced to 1 second. It's possible that in the future, ArenaNet might adjust the adrenaline cost for this, but as long as we're like this, I'm pretty happy. And lastly here, the power is yours seems to be an interesting one, because this shout basically, well, what does it do? It supplies allies with more energy regeneration. So far, this hasn't been too useful, because you get, well, 1 energy regeneration and the skill lasts for 3 seconds. Costs 4 adrenaline, so you can cast it pretty often, but I mean, the effect is not really strong. Now, if you can go up to 2 energy regeneration and cast it for 4 seconds, or it lasts for 4 seconds, then it could actually be pretty interesting to see how this might even substitute Blood's Power, or at least complement it for energy-intensive teams. The changes to Ranger overall, I didn't find too noteworthy. Disrupting Lunge was interesting to see. It is a skill where your animal companion does a lunge towards the enemy and deals damage. And if the foe that is being attacked uses a skill, they get interrupted and that skill gets disabled. Now, seeing that the Ranger will be able to use that skill more often, that's a pretty good change. This is a really good skill actually now. So happy to see that change. And Melandro's shot got slightly nerfed. I'm not really sure why. On paper it is a pretty good skill, but you wouldn't see it too often. You know, it causes bleeding. If a foe moves or is knocked down, then they take extra damage and they are crippled, so it's good for applying a few conditions. But still, although it's okay, it's good, I haven't seen it too often, so I'm not sure why this was nerfed. And one change that is pretty cool here is that just nature rituals and their activation time gets reduced. Yeah, thumbs up, ArenaNet. Ritualist got a few changes. For PvE, I think the elite skill changes are quite nice, but I don't think the changes are too massive here. What I would like to point out for Ritualist though is how ArenaNet apparently tries to make a Spirit Spammer viable again in PvP. So the PvP activation time for many of the Spirit skills has been reduced, and also the recharge. I still have to figure out if that makes the Spirit Spammer really viable for PvP. I personally I have my concerns about this, especially since you cannot use the Spirit Recall skill, you know, the Cursing skill. You cannot take that into PvP, which would be massive. If you could, you know, relocate spirits to your position, you can't do that in PvP that easily. So I'm looking forward, and looking forward to test a build with more spirit skills, but I have my concerns. Okay, coming up, lastly, Warrior. Warrior got phenomenal buffs all over. So many skills got buffed. Two I would like to point out is Cleave. Cleave is a skill, pretty simple one. You hit, you strike, you do more damage. And an X skill that runs on Adrenaline. 4 Adrenaline is the cost. Now, not only is the damage increased, but you also hit adjacent foes, 2 random ones, or 1 or 2 random ones. I think this is a pretty good change. But also 100 Blades, one of my favorite warrior skills. 100 Blades got its recharge time decreased and its damage increased. A really cool skill. Also works in some farm builds for warrior, if I'm not mistaken. So overall, just great to have. Alright, the update balance patch is absolutely massive. There's so many changes. Obviously most intriguing because of its changes to Mesmer and the current PvE hero team meta. So let's see what we find next. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Would be really interesting to hear your opinion about this change, but also all the other changes that have been made. And I would also be interested if you create some new builds for yourself based on this. Let me know in the comments. These are exciting times for Guild Wars. I'm happy. I hope you're happy too. And we see each other next time.